This is my Yobo FC Twin clone video game system. It plays Nintendo and Super Nintendo games. I bought this back in October of 2007, and 10 years later it still works. So, we're gonna spend a video talking about this thing because I feel like it. So, yeah.
Okay, so a couple things before we begin the video proper. First of all, you'll have to forgive the handheld nature. I can't find my tripod anywhere, so we're doing this one-handed. And there's going to be a lot of shaking and moving and stuff. That can't be helped. Also, this is a rambling video about a system that I bought about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years actually, which sort of kicked off this entire adventure, as it were. So as such, it's not a review, it's not a critical overview or anything like that, though I guess we could look at the system fast, little bits and bobs there, but otherwise I'm not trying to sell you or recommend this thing, because nowadays there are better alternatives, you know, especially the NES side. There's that retro USB or whatever it's called, or retro AVS or something like that. And then there's the one that's made of aluminum that costs $500. You know, so you could play old NES games on a block of metal for some reason. That suits your fancy. This is made of plastic. It's much cheaper and much lighter. Though it does carry some weight compared to some of the other NES clone system schlock things, which weigh nothing. This has a bit of weight to it, actually. Not much, but it's something. It also has a reset button. It has a switch which lights up depending on what you're playing, either 8-bit NES or 16-bit Super NES, which is nice. The Super NES side has little tab things, which means if you want to play Super Famicom, you'll either need an adapter or you'll need to rip the tabs off. I've elected to keep the tabs and go with an adapter because I'm not an idiot. As you can see here, we have Super Nintendo controller ports, which means you could use your old Super Nintendo controller things, but none of the NES stuff like the Advantage or Power things or stuff like that. No zapper light gun on this, although I think they made a zapper like device, but I never got it because I never really needed it. Because, you know, a zapper uses a CRT television, and even when I had a CRT television, the one or two zapper light guns that I did have never really worked with it, so never saw the point. Missed opportunity, never releasing any light gun games on the Wii or the Wii U Virtual Console. Would have been a perfect kind of game with the pointer of the Wii remote, but I digress. Anyways, here's your back of it. It's fairly simple. AV composite output and your DC input, which I found rather hilarious. And you have vents, lots and lots of vents and little feet to keep your thing sort of focused. It doesn't work that well, but then again, it's 10 years old. There's bound to be a bit of wear and tear, as you can probably tell right here. It came in about 3 colors. This is a nice silver one. There's also a pearl colored one that I have stored around somewhere, and there's also a black one which I never bought because, well, I like the silver one. It's nicer, I think. But anyways, this looks like a Super Nintendo Mini, which I have right here and I bought years later. It looks almost the same positioning of the switch and the thing and the controller ports, and the only thing that's really changed is that there's an extra cartridge slot, so it's a little taller, and also this one has little light things and this doesn't. But otherwise it's pretty much the same thing. Even the logos, the Super Nintendo logo, the FC Twin logo, and you have the Nintendo logo nowhere to be. The Nintendo logo's here, and this one, you know. I'm looking at everything through the viewfinder and not actually at the systems, which probably would have been a smart idea. But anyways, we'll set that aside here. Anyways, I bought this thing in October 2007 at the flea market all those ages ago. The same one that I go to today. Cool guy. Got to know him over the years. So, it's not. This is actually the second unit that I bought. The first unit I bought. The first unit I brought home. I pulled out my meager collection of about 20 or 30 NES games that I still had left over, and sampled a couple games. The sound emulation wasn't quite great there, but it was nice to have a system that I could play NES games and play them rather easily. Even and yes, like any clone system, the grip at first is kind of tight, but after a while, it got better. Naturally, this being a 2-in-1, it got to a point where I needed to get Super Nintendo games. Because I had a Super NES, a few years back, but I sold it in a garage sale with a meager selection of games, and I kind of regret doing that, especially since... But, the mindset was, at the time, it was an original Super Nintendo model, the one with the sliding things and the eject button. You know what I'm talking about. It's the one that looks like an SNES Classic Edition, except much bigger, and it actually plays cartridges, and it uses these kinds of input things. Anyways, I didn't have any controllers, and I sold it for like, $10 with a bunch of games, and really a bunch of good games. So, games that you would not normally, sell for $10 with a console and shit, you'd sell for a lot more, but at the time I just wanted to get rid of it. There's a lot of stuff I wanted to get rid of at the time, and now I sort of regret it because but most fortunately I bought it all back anyways, except for Madden, which I never really cared for, so that was no big loss. So I bought this, tried out a few NES games, bought a couple SNES games. I bought Super Mario World and Super Castlevania 4. Because I figured, why not? You get the game that came with the Super Nintendo, and you get one of the better Castlevania titles of the vintage style, at least in my opinion. I tried those games out, or at least I tried one of the games, popped it in, put it on the Switch, and naturally, there's no light coming on. There is a light that comes on when you pop it on 8-bit, and it does show picture, it does work, but when you try to put it on 16-bit, there's no picture, there's nothing like that. I tried cleaning it and all that stuff, but it simply did not work. So I brought the unit back. The guy was cool. I told him exactly what happened. Look, the light doesn't work. There's supposed to be a little light turning on. He was cool. He let me trade in my defective one for a proper one that worked and everything, and this one was better in every conceivable way. Not only did the Super NES side work, but the sound quality on the NES side is much more accurate. A lot of these NES clone systems, like the Retron 1 for example, which is a stock NES Famiclone thing, NES on a chip clone thing that's been released for ages, and it's been released under a moniker of names and a moniker of under multiple identities. Multiple companies have put out that base model. The sound quality isn't great, the color quality isn't great. This one's a little better on that front. The colors are somewhat closer to the NES side, the sound's closer to the NES side. The only thing is that it has these visible lines on screen. If you want an example of what this thing does, footage-wise, I'd say go check out any NES review I've done, in the first, I guess, from 2010 to like every once in a while. I still play this. You find an NES review and you see those faint visible lines, like really pronounced lines, it's probably being played on the FC Twin, and even some of the Super Nintendo stuff, especially early on, was played on the FC Twin, which is rather nice, except for the few games that it wasn't compatible with. It wasn't compatible with Castlevania 3, it supposedly wasn't compatible with, it doesn't work with Castlevania 3, it doesn't work with Battletoads, supposedly wasn't supposed to work with Dragon Warrior 2, but I've played Dragon Warrior 2 on this and it works fine. And even on the Super Nintendo side, it's not perfect. Some games, there's some weird things where textures are missing, like Super Empire. I have the footage somewhere. I'm gonna see if I could pull it out, but when you're playing the Battle of Hoth, there's textures missing, from the floor. Super Ghouls and Ghosts, there's a boss missing. Super Turrican 2, there's, some of the graphics are like garbled colors and that sort of thing. Little, faults like this and that, but at the time it was a nice, cheap, convenient way of playing like NES and SNES, and you could do it in one little handy dandy console thing. And it was nice to have something that I could play my old NES games, and something that could give me a reason to start kicking up a Super NES games. And then all of a sudden I'm getting all this other shit. Not so much that I already had that, but the N64, the GameCube, and that's the other FC Twin, and that's footage for a future video project that I shouldn't be revealing, the Atari and stuff like that. And eventually I got myself a top-loading NES and original thing NES. That's a whole bunch of crap stuff there, but it all started with this thing. Not only did this start with this thing, but it also started with something and something and something. The minute I got this, I also started recording all my game footage onto DVD as a personal archive of sorts. Not necessarily, for the sake of, oh, I want to make videos someday, because I never really had that intention until years later, and even then, it was just an idea. But this is what kicked off the whole thing for me, actually, and it still works. Clone systems, especially in those days, were notorious for having short lifespans and crapping out, and the quality would be inconsistent. I've heard people say they've had this thing, crap out on them after a couple months or a couple weeks. This still lasted me 10 years. In fact, the reason why I bought that Pearl one was in case this crapped out after a while, and this still works, while that one, the controller ports kind of whacked or something. Like, some games won't register the controller for some reason. Super Nintendo games, no less, which is kind of odd. But this thing still works, and I still play it. Even though I have the other things, I still play this because, let's see, the other ones are older. I don't want to wreck them, needlessly, so I'll stick with this. The only times I'll pull out the other consoles is to play games that this thing won't play. But other than that, this is my clone system of choice. It's my authentic fake Nintendo thing, to quote Classic Game Room, even if it doesn't have a shiny holographic sticker in the bottom. But you know what, that's okay, I don't care. It works for me, it's nice, it's all I ever really need as far as NES and Super NES goes. So it's just a little thing that I wanted to sort of talk about this thing, and sort of, talk about this thing that kicked off this whole endeavor, this whole hobby, bring it back, sort of, because I was sort of, falling out of video games. They were just getting too expensive. Had an Xbox, had a PS2, I was buying mostly compilation discs, and then I got this, and, anyways, so, thanks for, watching, I guess. Thanks for listening, and all that stuff, and, till next time, take care, and good night. Later.